All right, so I am, as stated, Doug Parsons, and I'm here to introduce our guest speaker for tonight. Dr. Michael Muehlenbein is professor and chair of the Department of Anthropology at Baylor University. He holds advanced degrees in public health and anthropology and has interests in a variety of topics relating to ecological immunity and evolutionary endocrinology. He's particularly interested in the roles of hormones in mediating human life history trade-offs, effect and the behavioral immune system, immune biomarker development, and risks of emerging infectious diseases associated with human-wildlife contact. Tonight, he's going to be talking to us on One Health and travel medicine. So if you will, join me in welcoming Dr. Michael Muehlenbein.
Thank you, sir. How's that? Can you hear me okay? All right. An enormous thank you for the invitation, first to be here, and of course a thank you to all of you for deciding to spend your Thursday evening with me. Knowing what I know about TJC and University of Texas Tyler, you deserve a much better speaker than myself, but I'm going to do my best to entertain you for just a little bit. When I was asked to come up with the topics that I preferred to speak about, it made me reflect on what it is that I do. And that seems to change more often than it doesn't, right? Kid from south side of Chicago, parents, never finished high school, dad electrician, mom a homemaker. I was supposed to be an electrician. But I was provided with some very fortunate opportunities. Originally going to college for jazz performance. So if there's any undergrads in here who are unconvinced about what you should be majoring in, switching is the normal, okay? And that's to be expected. It's not something to be shameful of. And then I circuitously found my way in front of you now through 7 different universities, professor at 4 of them. Baylor's my 4th institution, and doing a number of different projects that are related, I guess, broadly on 2 themes. And what Doug mentioned most was evolutionary medicine, endocrinology and immunology in particular from life history perspective, so human evolutionary biology. And that's what I'm going to talk about tomorrow night. But to be honest, I have not moved away from that. I continue to do that work, but I've always maintained a presence in the field, that is international work. And it's this work in One Health that affords me the opportunity to spend time abroad. One Health may or may not have heard of it because of the pandemic. It's just the very old, not new idea that there are interconnections between human and non-human animal health, particularly domestic species, wildlife, and of course the environment. And if you want to fix one, you have to fix others. And if you change one, you expect change in others, right? So it's the holistic view using a combination of tools from the social and physical life sciences to understand causation. And when you understand causation, you can better provide prevention, right? So why do this, right? I've always been interested mostly in zoonotic diseases, okay? Those are pathogens that originate from non-human animals. We just came out of a pandemic of zoonotic origin, okay? And these are not new. Everybody's talking about Mpox now and avian influenza. The reality is that we've been co-evolving with pathogens since before we were a species, okay? And they have not gone away, right? We experienced some decrease in the relative impact of infectious diseases on morbidity and mortality because of the development of medicine and antimicrobial agents and so on. But still, infectious diseases cause a very significant amount of For example, disability-adjusted life years, morbidity and mortality, and so on. And you don't have to go far to find these things. These are not diseases of the other. They are not the exotic things like Ebola. There's an outbreak of Ebola, about 250 people in Uganda right now. Okay, these are, again, to be expected. Avian influenza, it'll go, and then it'll come back in a few years, as it always does. Okay, it just doesn't normally establish itself in the population. So I was very much interested in understanding how and why these things happen. Okay, come on. And I was particularly interested in working with primates. We're a primate, okay? And I went into public health after my parents convinced me not to major in music anymore. I switched to environmental science, then went to Tulane for public health. I was supposed to go to the Gambia to work on the WHO and the Guinea worm eradication program, something that Jimmy Carter worked on, actually. And I was doing an MPH in tropical medicine and met my would-be wife. Couldn't leave her and stayed on for another master's. Well, but while I was there, I'm first gen again, so that means I've always worked, even when I was in school full time. And so when I was at Tulane, I was working at the Primate Center. And so I'm being trained in public health and working in the Primate Center, and I wanted to combine the two, specifically going international. I had not traveled international before that. I hadn't gone anywhere, really, except for school. So I had the idea that I wanted to understand better disease transmission between wild, non-human primates, apes, chimpanzees in this case, and humans. And so I found an advisor, and if you've ever seen Gorillas in the Mist, Diane Fossey, when she was murdered, he took over and he was my advisor. So I began working in Kibale National Park in southwestern Uganda. Why? Why work with primates in particular? Well, because they are the closest genetic relatives to us. And as a result of that, they share a lot of pathogens. Okay? And there's been a great deal of research on this, primarily in the laboratory, especially regarding occupational exposures and the development of vaccines. For example, chimps, captive chimps were used for the development of the Hep C vaccine. But I wanted to look in the wild context, what is happening in nature, what we would call a spillover event. You might remember this from COVID. We had a spillover event, most likely from horseshoe bats that were in a wet market or consumed or purchased and held for human consumption, right? But outside of that, what is happening? What are the other activities that we're doing besides bushmeat that facilitate these kind of issues? Yeah, I can't even read that. There's no way you are. But this is just an example, a small example of some of the cases that we've documented of zoonotic diseases from wild primates. So we would consider these wild populations of animals sources and sinks. A source would be a reservoir for infection, like coronaviruses from bats. Also sinks, in that biodiversity in general serves what we call a zoo prophylaxis in terms of providing a buffer to largely prevent human infection. But it also means that these animals are typically immunologically naive to our own pathogens, and as a result, especially if they're endangered, they've got really protracted reproductive cycles. It means that we can wipe out their populations very quickly. You're all familiar with Jane Goodall's chimpanzees, Gombe, Tanzania, right? About half of them have died from polio from humans, okay? Just one of many different examples. So I finished my education in 2004 and was attending I was a tenure track at Wisconsin Milwaukee at the time. I attended a conference in Leipzig, Germany on diseases of great apes. It was the first such group. And I met he was a French guy. He was a smoker. I was a smoker at the time, not anymore. I still sound like it. But we kind of hit it off at this conference, and he was a veterinarian that ran an NGO in Malaysian Borneo. Okay, so I had done my doctoral work living with wild chimps, documenting potential disease spread, intestinal infection in particular between them and local human communities, and vice versa. So we hit it off, and he invited me out to Malaysian Borneo. Borneo is a big island between Thailand and Australia, and it is composed of a number of different countries that share it. Malaysia owns Sabah, which is the northernmost portion that's pictured there. And that area is home to about half of all the world's orangutans. Yes, the correct pronunciation is orang-utan. It's not orangutan. And specifically, I was there to develop a field sampling program to monitor the health of these and other pretty exotic species, the forest elephant, which are much smaller and hairier than you'd expect, proboscis monkeys with the giant noses, and all sorts of interesting species. And while I was there, I got the opportunity to work at this rehabilitation center called Sepalak. Anybody been there? No? All right. It's one of the largest primate rehabilitation centers in the world, where they take in orphaned, confiscated animals from the pet trade or from oil palm plantations, and they need to rehabilitate them and release them. Well, I was collaborating with colleagues at that time that were doing work on the origins of HIV in West Africa. We know that HIV came from SIV, simian immunodeficiency virus, from chimpanzees, gorillas, and sooty mangabes in West Africa. And that was from consumption, hunting, butchering, and consumption of the animals, not necessarily the eating of cooked meat or anything like that, but the preparation, right? Because I bite my nails. So a lot of opportunities for pathogen spillover. Well, I was working in Malaysian Borneo, and Malaysian Borneo is primarily Muslim. And so we didn't have very much bushmeat. And what I did witness, though, was an influx of hundreds of thousands of backpackers and other versions of tourists coming in and taking little side trips to places like this. Okay? And largely unregulated, with a little bit of signage, don't touch the animals kind of thing. But I wanted to really, at that point, I was interested in looking at the origins of Plasmodium vivax malaria from non-human species over there, because we suspect that's where it originated from about 2 million years ago. And so, kind of as a side project, we started sampling the animals here, because there's a lot of malaria out there, not just in humans, but in many hundreds and hundreds of species have their own versions of malaria. Okay, and so we were looking for these, and in that process, we're hunting for malaria. Colleagues of mine in Africa are hunting for viruses, and what I was witnessing were some human behaviors that made me reflect. Again, I did my doctoral work, lived for a year with wild chimps. No electricity, running water, anything like that. So my impression of these wild primates is very different from perhaps yours, or anybody visiting a zoo, or if you have the opportunity to see these animals in the wild, right? You think about them differently. You think about your opportunities to interact with them differently, right? And a place like this, they, like a lot of places that are not government funded, they've got to raise money somehow. And one of the ways they did that was letting tourists come in and view some of the feedings of the animals. Okay, you could do this. You can go to San Antonio Zoo, Waco Zoo. You can feed a giraffe, a slice of lettuce or whatever. There wasn't feeding allowed at this time, but there was an enormous amount of contact and overlap. With nothing preventing these things from happening. And it wasn't just orangutans. Again, there were a variety of other primates, macaques, again, without a separation between human and non-human animals. I was, again, I'm not trained as a social scientist, so I was just watching. And what I kept seeing in general were basically stupid human behaviors, right? And that's one thing. Humans are really, really good at doing things that are really bad for ourselves. Okay? And so kind of had like a little light bulb. How and why does this work with wildlife? Okay? You have seen the news, you've seen the Wikipedia and Google pages of a number of selfie-related deaths, right? Because you get too close to a bison, or you fall off the cliff at the Grand Canyon, or something like this. There's something about how we interact with nature, and that has evolutionary origins, okay? So some of the things that you see, there's opportunities besides just touching. There's indirect contact, fecal samples, people spitting. We were primarily concerned with the threat of transmission of respiratory viruses. Okay, and you probably know this. When flu season hits, big cats in zoos typically get human flu. Okay, it's not just primates. We share a lot of these pathogens, and there's a lot of possibility of transmission. Oh, this is just one of many different examples. This guy had a giant leech on him. There are buffalo leeches there that are 12 inches long. Just amazing. And they'll follow you if you're in a canoe. They'll follow you in the water. It's kind of terrifying. So lots of opportunities. Now, there's some signage that says don't touch the animals. Of course, the monkeys, they can't read. Humans can, but tend to ignore the instructions, right? Amusing part is the pamphlet that he's holding in his hand is the one that I produced that said don't touch the monkeys. So, unbeknownst to myself at the time, there's this entire discipline known as travel medicine. Travel medicine is focused almost exclusively on preparing people to travel abroad and then treat them when they get back. There's the International Society for Travel Medicine, but it's not very large. It's only about 1,600 physicians. So most people who travel, I mean, how many of you travel with your vaccine certificate? Doug. How many of you check out the CDC Red Book or the WHO Yellow Book before going to a different country? Thank you. But a minority, right? So in other words, preparedness for travel is poor. And thus, illness during travel is common. I don't need to repeat that. We all have our own personal stories, right? Why is it common? Largely preventable, right? But, you want to eat the street food. I do as well, absolutely. But mistakes happen. Sometimes it's because of a disconnect between what we think we know and what we really know. And these are known as knowledge, attitudes, and practices. So what you really know, what you think you know, is way bigger than what you really know, and that influences your behaviors. Okay? And that can result in poor behavior in travelers. You have heard of people putting graffiti on the Great Pyramids and so on. And it made me reflect, why would you do that? It's that sensation seeking, that immediate gratification that we need that is all compounded now by the presence of social media and its intermittent enforcement, right? Well, I wanted to understand these issues in reference to zoonotic diseases. Again, zoonotic diseases are those which originate from non-human animals, but a lot of them are bidirectional. Okay? People get sick during travel for a variety of reasons. The famous anthropologist Victor Turner talked about the communities that you form when you travel. Right? Do you meet, if you're staying in a hostel and you meet some other people, you go out and do an activity, you are separating yourself from your normal life. That's why we go on vacation. So we don't feel normal, and thus we don't act normal. And that's problematic in some regards, right? Especially loss of inhibition and loss of situational awareness. You do things that you would not normally do at home, right? Show of hands. who has personally experienced this. Don't be shameful. I've done it. How many people don't wear a seatbelt in a taxi? Yeah. Especially in traveling abroad. I mean, sometimes they don't have seatbelts, right? But behaviors are different. And we justify them somehow, right? We reason ourselves into potentially dangerous situations. And this is what I began documenting. So all the photos in here are mine. Different locations where there are not just the opportunity for human-wildlife contact and overlap, but some places where it's encouraged. Has anybody gone somewhere where they encouraged you to touch a wild animal? Yeah? Where? Thailand? Anybody go to Thailand? No? Bali, Indonesia, Ubud Monkey Forest. It's all over the place. Some places do it more ethically than others. For example, I worked for a while in northern Thailand with elephant populations that were rehabilitating, and they eat a lot and they cost a lot of money and they need to generate funds, right? But there's other places. On the bottom left, you've got Jikokudani, which is in Japan. It's the Japanese snow monkeys that sit in the onsens, the outside hot tubs. I've seen people get into those with the animals. It's like a monkey soup. It's disgusting. Arashiyama on the right, which is just outside Tokyo. The top right in Bali. Top left is Trentham Monkey Park in Manchester, UK. Okay, so most of the, we have the drive-through safari parks, right? This is at a whole different level. Thailand is basically a lot of places in Southeast Asia where some of these are often encouraged by the tour operators. They work on tips, right? Are you going to give them a bigger tip if you took a picture holding a monkey or if you're 25 feet and taking a picture of that monkey, right? So I wanted to know, why do people behave this way, and do these reasons outweigh common sense? Does the heart override the brain? And reflecting on this, there is a long history of obviously human-animal interactions. If you look at the first cave paintings, what are they of? Other species, besides some abstract pieces. They're of other species. The cave paintings of human form don't come until much later. So we have always had to know our place in nature, in part because it's a food source. And then other things, protection and so on. So it certainly predated E.O. Wilson, Kellert, and others. In fact, Darwin wrote about this in one of his texts, trying to understand animal behaviors in response to humans and humans in response to animal behaviors. And later, Wilson and others coined this term biophilia. As the term implies, it means an innate attraction to nature in general. Okay, now it doesn't mean positive, even though the word is philia. Okay, it just means some type of desire, some emotion, positive or negative feedback that you get from interacting with natural processes, with the environment, with other species, right? And this translates into desire and sensation seeking, specifically in reference to wildlife. And how do we explore our environment, right? Arguably, the first way that we've done it as an organism was touch, right? Feeling way before we had fingers and hands and so on. But now we still explore our environment via touch, right? The somatosensory system, the haptic system. Okay, this is why not everything is going to go online. I'm not going to buy a mattress online. Okay, I need to lay on it first, kind of thing. But we explore our environment, and it seems for most people, it's more satisfying to be able to touch something as opposed to just look at it. If you go to the pyramids in Egypt, are you just going to look at them? or are you going to want to touch it? Yeah, I mean, same thing, but this backfires when this animal can, one, either maim and kill you, or there's a possibility of pathogen transmission. I, again, interested in the latter. So these things, this type of interaction between humans and wildlife happens all the time, usually with negative consequences. Right? People are surprised when they go try to pet a squirrel and the squirrel bites them, and they act like it's the squirrel's fault. I see this. I did a survey on campus right before COVID about this, and the number of especially young college men who try to catch squirrels on campus it's above zero, and it shouldn't be, right? But these happen all the time. Going back to my origin story, I didn't have the opportunity for study abroad or international travel until I got to grad school. And then after, when I was a professor, I started taking students abroad. And I've done it 16 times now. And it's by far my favorite activity. I think that's what I'm supposed to be doing in life. One time I was leading a group, this was in 2015, leading a group of 18 undergrads in South Africa. When, you can't see it, but as the story says up there, the top left one, there was a student from a different university who was pulled out of the window of a vehicle. She was hanging out, taking a photo, and a lioness came up and got her. You can imagine the phone calls that I got. No, it was not my student group. It was not even within 100 kilometers of where we were. But again, these things happen, okay? Yeah. And of course, there's plenty of stories of some of the tragedies that we impose on these other species, right? Have you seen any of these kinds of things? Pulling animals out of the water to take photos with them. I've been working of the 16 times I've taken students abroad, the last 3 were in the Galapagos Islands. And there's been very classic studies of people who go around and pick up like blue-footed boobies, which is this fantastically dumb-looking bird, but very well evolved for what it does. And the marine iguanas, because they're not, they're habituated to humans, but you pick them up and all of a sudden, after not even a few generations, they lose their stress responses. What happens when an animal loses its stress response? When a predator comes up, it really doesn't care. It dies. It gets eaten, right? So these things are happening all the time. It's unfortunate. Again, I was interested in what we can give to these wild species, in part because it's very difficult to get a research permit from somewhere to study what diseases wildlife in that area can give to visitors. You can imagine the impact that could have on tourism, right? So we reframe it to what impacts can we have on them, right? And there are many. And so, again, this started in Malaysia and Borneo for me. And it metastasized. It was a side project that has consumed me, but fortunately gives me the opportunity again to take students into the field. What started out as a very small basic survey has blown up beyond basic demographics and symptomology and vaccination history and other things to standardized questions on environmental psychology, what's called connectedness with nature. Do you feel like you're a part of nature, or are you there to control it, kind of thing? These things are very well studied, but not in the context of disease transmission. Also other things about risk-taking, sensation-seeking, egocentrism. I can do it even though I'm not supposed to, right? That entitlement that humans have. And that has resulted in a database from, actually, I don't show Thailand up there, of a lot of very, very detailed surveys and interviews to understand these questions, to try to triangulate what predicts some of these behaviors. And if we can predict these behaviors, then we can develop educational materials targeted to those specific audiences. So again, Malaysian Borneo started about 2007 with some very basic stuff. We are asking about vaccination history, right? And again, most people don't carry their vaccine card. It's not required. It's not standardized, okay, throughout the world. The only one that is standardized across countries is for yellow fever, okay? So don't expect you to be able to read this from this distance. It essentially says that people are under-vaccinated when they travel, okay? So they're in general underprepared. In fact, when we looked at their occupations, those in healthcare fields were not more likely to be vaccinated than others. Surprising to some of us, at least. Started asking questions like, what type of symptoms do you have right now, especially respiratory? And at any given time, we're finding that about half of the travelers within at least the past 7 days had some symptom. Okay? And symptomology, as I'll show in just a minute, is a really good predictor of actually having a virus at the time. One really interesting set of questions we began asking was, do you agree that humans can get and give diseases from and to wild animals? And at first, we're getting really, really high responses, right? The issue is that this is juxtaposed with, for example, in this data set, willingness to touch. Let's say if 98% of you in this room say, yeah, I understand what a zoonotic disease is, rabies and other things. But still 35% of you would, if given the opportunity, touch one of these wild animals. Of course, it's context specific. I'm not talking about you in particular. But we wanted to know what the actual risks were. And you can't do that just through surveys. So we were sampling the animals for malaria anyway. We started sampling the tourists. Throat swabs and gargles and spit samples, and multiplexing them for a number of different respiratory pathogens, like coronavirus, not new. Okay. And what we found was, at least 6% at any given time, and we repeated the study a few times now, these individuals have active viral shedding. Well, what does that mean? It means we need to do something in terms of preparing people better before they go abroad, and then in situ, while we're in these countries, provide better protection. Well, how do you do this? Right? Where do you get the money from this? Viral sampling, it takes a lot of money and a lot of time. It's not feasible. Okay? But we know the solution to the problem. The solution to the problem is to separate people from wildlife. And you can't do that all the time. So we considered something like masking, and we got a grant for that. At Sepalak, we were able to install hand washing stations, shoe disinfection stations that were probably used for a few months and then abandoned. And especially problematic was the masking. You can't see it, but most people, don't actually put the mask on correctly. We've had some recent experience with that, right? But where do you get them from? How do you dispose of them? They're not recyclable, and they're considered medical waste. So it's problematic. It's very clear that different people go to different places for different reasons, right? And so we thought that maybe it depends on the wildlife that you grew up around. You grew up on a farm, you have pets, these kind of things. But again, at this stage in my career, I'm interested still in non-human primates in particular, and so we went to Japan. Japan is home to the Japanese macaque, many thousand of animals throughout the country in these national parks in particular. And in the south, one of the largest southernmost island of Kyushu is Takasakiyama, which is one of these monkey mountains, essentially. And it's where these animals are provisioned daily, and you can pay $1 to go up and see them and kind of thing. And so we're repeating the sampling here, but it's expanding significantly. We're asking different questions. Now, specifically asking and interviewing people why. So we would put signage up that says, "Do not touch or feed the animals." And then we would station students up at the top of the mountain selling bags of food. And we'd see how many would still try to buy the food. Almost all of them. Right? So then we asked them, why? Why would you do this? Some of the answers, because they're cute, they're juvenilized, they're neotenized, they're fuzzy, they look like us, we want to touch them, they're adorable, right? But other interesting answers like, I paid a lot of money to come here. Even if I'm sick, am I going to stay in the hotel room? Am I not? If you spend the money to go to Rwanda to visit mountain gorillas, we're talking a lot of money. Okay, there's only a few permits given out every day, and they're several $1,000s each. If you're symptomatic, are you going to disclose that? Or are you going to do it anyway? So there's thrill of adventure, there's that entitlement, because they've seen other people do it. This is a problem. Professionals doing it. Celebrities. That's Justin Bieber on the bottom right. His monkey Marcel that he abandoned in a German airport. It communicates acceptability. Right? That's problematic. So I had done my original doctoral work in Uganda. I knew I wanted to go back to Africa, and I started hunting for a place to do this work. And I originally tried to get into the Cape of Good Hope Nature Reserve just south of Cape Town, South Africa, home to chakma baboons, which are these huge, huge animals. And there's a lot of conflict with local residents in terms of crop raiding and other things. And some people want you to relocate the animals, but you can't relocate a territorial animal like that and put them into a different place. You have to euthanize them, and it's complicated, right? So I didn't get a permit to do that because, again, they were concerned about the effects on tourism. And I ended up working at a number of animal sanctuaries in the Garden Route, the southern route between Port Elizabeth and Cape Town down there. And it's full of these animal sanctuaries because there's laws in South Africa that say that you cannot own an indigenous species. So you can't own a baboon. But you can own a chimpanzee because they're not from South Africa. Well, then they're not really buying chimps, but people are buying big cats. These things need permanent homes. Smaller primates like capuchins, squirrel monkeys, that's a ring-tailed lemur up there. And when they get bigger, people don't want them anymore, so they need forever homes, right? You get all these sanctuaries popping up that are largely unregulated. I was working at what I considered, of course, the most ethical. Expanding the work there, we're asking about pet ownership in particular. You could see, if you can, at that distance, that some of the answers are going down. We originally had 98% agreed that you can give a disease to one of these animals. In Japan, it was about half that. And the desire for pet ownership was way, way up. Well, maybe that's because they've grown up interacting with these animals. They're not considered as exotic, right? They're more considered like a dog or a cat. Here, you're getting people that are just passing through. They're not going there specifically to view wild animals, okay? About 31% of them did. And this is when we started asking about regulations at other animal sanctuaries. When you go to some of these parks, when you book on Travelocity to go abroad, it doesn't give you health information unless there's some type of State Department warning, right? You have to seek those things out yourself. So when you get in country, that's when you have to provide people with this type of information. And most of the time, people are not informed about such things. And that's because most of the time they don't exist. So I wanted to target a different type of traveler. Not those that were seeking out contact with animals, but rather cruise ship passengers. Cruise ship tourism is completely different than wildlife-based tourism, right? It's a different mindset. You were there for very, very different reasons. So trying to target the North American audience in particular, we started working in St. Kitts in the Caribbean. And this island has an interesting history of vervet or African green monkeys. There's a little one right here. They were probably originally brought in by buccaneers and pirates for food and as pets. Later, there was a biomedical facility that was developed on the island, and when it shut down, they just released the animals. And so now there are parts of St. Kitts that are just overrun with these African green vervets. And so what happened was, it became government-sponsored eventually, not originally, that you had groups of individuals going out and usually trapping them, eating the mother, taking the baby, and then bringing the babies to these the cruise ports. We call them monkey men. And to take pictures, $10 to take a picture holding one of these things. And they go up and down the beaches, too. It's really actually hard to avoid it. And the trick there that I didn't realize was more common than I saw a lot in Bali, Indonesia, was that they actually put the animals on you and you have to pay to get them off. Anybody here ever been to Bali and see this? These animals are trained to steal your flip-flops, and you got to pay to give them back. Right? So in a lot of these cases, some of the overlap, the contact is almost inevitable. It's encouraged to a certain degree. In this case, a huge proportion, 45%-ish, actually touched an animal while on that trip. Again, a little bit difficult to avoid, but when you get off in a cruise port and there's a guy holding monkeys, most of the time, for most people, it's hard to say no. At this point, we're doing some much more sophisticated stats to try to triangulate some of the predictors of these behaviors. And this is where we started to, at least statistically, show that people are experiencing these cognitive affective dissonance or inconsistencies. This is the idea that you know better, but you still do it. So in other words, you can love an animal too much, right? We're all guilty of that to a certain degree with our pets at home. But the idea here, it showed that those who had that more connection with nature, who said, yeah, I'm willing to do more to protect them, they were also the same people that are more willing to touch. And those types of attitudes predicted touching. Okay? So at this point, we're realizing, and this is known in public health literature, and we saw it in COVID, that you can't convince people to stop doing something by providing them with statistics. Right? You have to, in this case, appeal to emotion. A lot of people, did not take, maybe still don't take COVID seriously unless they knew someone who got really sick or died from it. There's a difference there, right? So you've got to appeal to emotion. That brought us to a different cruise port, Gibraltar. British overseas territory between Spain and Morocco. The Rock of Gibraltar has had a population of Barbary macaques. They call them Barbary apes. They're not apes. They have tails. Been there for hundreds of years, okay? With stories about the British benefiting by, maintaining this place from invaders because this was their army of apes, right? Well, it was a similar situation in that you go up there, you're looking at the pretty view, you see and they're beautiful animals. They are. They're really fuzzy. And so it's hard not to do it. And again, this is really a place where the tour guides are encouraging these things. Now, and this place has a little bit better signage, a little bit more active personnel, but I mean, all of these things require money, right? Let's just skip ahead. And again, we found that this is where we found that those who reported being more willing to do things, we're talking about more willing to mask up, more willing to wash hands, use hand sanitizers, more willing to give a blood or a fecal sample in order to get in there and interact with these animals. They're also the same the same people who express the most desire to deviate from public health recommendations. Interesting. I mean, obviously, these similar ideas are found all throughout public health. And not just limited to the places that I've described or the species that I've been interested in. I started working with the International Society for Travel Medicine and the CDC, and we did a study. GeoSentinel is a surveillance network that is based globally, where if you get bit by an animal or if you have an intestinal infection, you can come see travel specialists. Now, more times than not, people show up to get a rabies shot because they had an exposure. And we're not just talking about exposures of cats and dogs, a lot of bad exposures, and they have documentation of how and why these things happen. People are actively trying to touch bats. Come on, right? Please don't touch a bat. I don't know why I have to say that, but so we documented all of these animal exposures, the majority of the time getting PEP, which is post-exposure prophylaxis. And this is a fraction of the people that actually get it. So think about it. If you're in country somewhere, if you're in Kathmandu, Nepal, which is a big hot spot for this stuff, and you get bit by a monkey there, which they do have monkeys there, are you going to wait till you get home to get a rabies shot, or are you going to get it there? It depends. If you were at the Ubud monkey forest in Bali, Indonesia, the bites happen all the time, almost daily. As a result, clinics have popped up around these forests to provide vaccination, post-exposure vaccination, and are charging $2,000 to $3,000 for you to get the shot. Now, the immunoglobulin is very expensive. If you had the pre-exposure or PrEP prophylaxis, you don't need the immunoglobulin usually, but you still need the shot, and usually tetanus shot too. And here's the thing to remember, that all mammals can transmit rabies. It is not just cats, dogs, and bats, okay? All mammals are capable of it. I have not been bit by these. I've been bit by a sea lion in the Galapagos. And I remember vividly, and of course, I'm going to say it wasn't my fault. I was scuba diving and came out of the blue. I was friends at the time with the head of rabies at WHO, so I'm on my cell phone calling her from the boat, kind of freaking out a little bit. But fortunately, I had PrEP, that is the pre-exposure, so I didn't need those expensive shots afterwards. But she was excited because if I died, it would have been the first case of dying from rabies from a sea lion, which, I mean, if you got to go and you're, disease ecologist, that's pretty cool, right, Dean? Yeah. So these things are happening all over the place. People are bit by elephants. They're bit by deer, by, let's see, some of the weird ones on there, a cow. Some guy went in for a rabies vaccine because he got bit by a cow. It was really bad. Lots of different examples, okay? Not just the common ones that you think of. So I had the opportunity to move away from primates and work regionally because this was encouraged at the time by a Latin American initiative at Baylor. They wanted us to establish better relationships for student and faculty exchange and to explore the possibility of short and long-term study abroad. So we started working with Universidad San Francisco de Quito, USFQ, which has a satellite facility, just one little building, on one of the 14 Galapagos Islands. My PhD is in biological anthropology. If I have the opportunity to go to the Galapagos Islands, yeah, I'm going, right? Even if there's no monkeys there. So that started in November of 2019. Then COVID happened. We ended up going back in 21 and 22, and we started bringing students. Why? Well, it's a bucket list place for one, but besides that, it is intensive human-animal conflict and overlap. 97% of the entire area is a nature reserve. You're living in it. The city is actually located. It's one of the few cities that is technically located within a nature reserve. Okay, so you're not going to find them. You're walking over them, right? Which provides an interesting experience because it wasn't just an incredible natural laboratory for witnessing biological evolution. Now it's a fascinating social laboratory because you have all of these tourists coming and being serviced by local community members that they don't want to be in tourism. They just have no choice, right? And you're coming in there, and most of the time people are on these cruise ships and not even leaving money on the island, just their garbage. And this place really is incredible when it comes to wildlife, right? This is taken right in front of the facility that we now sponsor. And the opportunity for contact is tremendous. You actually have to avoid it. The signage is terrible, but again, where's the money going to come from to staff this, to better improve these things? You do have to pay now $300 just to get into the islands, but none of that money stays on the islands. It goes back to Quito and the mainland. So you get these, whether we call them beach masters, these older, dominant male sea lions that are territorial, right? And you fall asleep on a beach. I have a friend who fell asleep just a few months ago. He was sleeping. He fell asleep and got bit because an animal just walked up and got him while he was napping. Of course, there are people who intentionally seek these things out too. This was an interesting scenario. I was watching this play out with all of the other locals and tourists just kind of too afraid to correct them, right? I mean, yeah, all right, I won't go tangential about, willingness to speak up for what you think is right, and some of the reasons why we don't is fear of retaliation, right? So the opportunity for contact is tremendous. It's daily. It's moment to moment, and so it requires a more responsible person, and that's what we've been doing for 3 seasons now. I've taken a small group of undergrads on study abroad. We do the background work in terms of the academic portion at Baylor before we get there, and so then we can split our time between service learning and these research projects. The main change here was, for the first time, we're actually surveying local community members. So not just the tourists, but we are now picking up information on things like lack of access to health care. I fell off, there's a caldera near where the Beagle landed, and I was hiking it, fell and broke my finger, and couldn't get an x-ray on. There's no x-ray on any. There's actually people who live on a lot of people don't realize people live on the Galapagos Islands. There's about 60,000 people that live there at any given time on 3 of the 14 main islands. Lack of access to health care, lack of access, so you've got water insecurity. Fresh water is found on only 1 island. All the other water, you got to ship in. Food insecurity, all these other issues. So providing opportunity for us not just to understand the context of disease and tourism and wildlife, but now to provide people a voice, an opportunity to talk about these issues. that they clearly have not had the opportunity to do. So just to put a bow on things, humans participate in these behaviors. We probably will. I mean, for forever. It goes back probably forever. We have the same questions on how to modify human behaviors, how to get people to stop smoking, how to get your neighbor to recycle. All of these things are kind of interconnected. And we know the solution. The solution is to change human behavior. And that's way, way harder than things like virus hunting. So we got to take better care of ourselves. We got to take care of each other and better care of the environment around us. And on that note, I thank you very much for your time tonight.